Distribution of resources. So natural resources are not distributed evenly on Earth. Some examples: Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia have an abundance of coal. So we have all this coal that is um, right in this area. There's also other deposits of coal in the US, but we notice there are big areas without coal deposits. Okay. California has gold deposits. Georgia has large stands of trees for paper and lumber. So different areas have different natural resources. The US does have an abundance of different types of resources. So we are lucky in that where the US is so big and we cover so many different types of habitats and stuff, there are an abundance of different types of resources in the US. However, we don't have all the resources. We still have to get resources from other countries. Now, other areas have limited types of resources. So, for example, here the Middle East, say Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, etc., they have an abundance of petroleum reserves. So they have large petroleum reserves, large amounts of oil reserves, but they have very little fresh water. So they are able to export things like petroleum, but they have to import a lot of food because there's not a lot of fresh water. There's not a lot of agricultural land there to grow things. So again, these resources are distributed unevenly around the earth. Now, consumption of resources. We have billions of people throughout the world that use natural resources every day, and then much like the uneven distribution of resources, resource consumption is also uneven. So yes, resources are distributed unevenly. Well, they are consumed unevenly as well. So for example, the US makes up 5% of the world's population, but then consumes 25% of Earth's mineral and energy resources annually. So where we make up 5% of the world's population, we are using about 25% of the energy and mineral resources. Now, additional resources are required to transport many resources from their points of origin to the places where they are consumed. So this adds to the resources needed to consume these resources. So if, for example, if we take coal as an example, if it's mined in West Virginia but then burned in Tennessee, well, it's got to be transported from here to there. So it does require more resources just to transport the resources from one place to another. And as an example here, we have the global consumption of natural resources. So basically, the darker the color, the more resources that are consumed by that country. So it says private per capita. Per capita means per person, per head, basically. Consumption expressed in US dollars. So annually, if you're talking about the US, for example, we use more than $15,000 per person worth of resources. I think it's also places like parts of Europe are in that category. A little lower than us would be places like Australia, Canada, and then these numbers go down further and further until you get to parts of Africa where you're down to less than $200 worth of resources. So you kind of get this idea that large parts of the world, such as Europe, Europe being here, Northern Europe, Australia, Japan's basically about the same color as us here, the US, Canada, Mexico, etc. We use a lot more resources than, say, large parts of Africa and Asia, such as China here. Again, just highlighting that this resource consumption is uneven around the world.